When people hear that ancient tablets match the Bible, the conversation usually collapses into extremes. Either this proves everything, or names are meaningless, it's all coincidence. Both reactions miss the point. What we're actually asking here is a much more precise historical question. If the Torah's patriarchal narratives were written late, or invented without real knowledge of the Bronze Age world they describe, what would we expect the evidence to look like? And then, do we see that? Today, I'm going to walk through the Nuzi Tablets, a real independent archive of everyday legal and household records from the second millennium BCE, and compare personal names found there with names in the Torah. Not to claim identical people, not to cherry pick the sound-alikes, but to ask something more disciplined. Are the names in Genesis and the Torah operating inside the same historical naming ecosystem or not? To answer that responsibly, we can't just count names and declare victory. Names repeat, cultures overlap, patterns cluster. So instead, I'm going to use a Bayesian statistical model, a transparent way to weigh evidence without overclaiming. We'll do three things. List the overlapping name roots, carefully categorized as strong, moderate, or generic. Assign conservative probabilities, explicitly discounting common names and pattern overlap. Update our confidence step by step, showing exactly how much the name data should move the needle and how much it shouldn't. It's about asking whether the Torah knows the world it claims to describe. And when you combine name ecology with legal customs, household structures, and inheritance logic, all attested independently in the ancient Near East, the question stops being rhetorical. So let's slow down, do the math honestly, and see where the evidence actually leads. The Nuzi Tablets are a large collection of cuneiform clay tablets discovered in the early 20th century at the ancient city of Nuzi, modern Yorgan Tepe, near Kirkuk in northern Iraq. They date primarily to the 15th to 14th centuries BCE and are written mostly in Akkadian, reflecting a Hurrian-speaking society operating within Mesopotamian legal and economic traditions. What do the Nuzi tablets contain? They are everyday legal and administrative records, not myths or royal propaganda. Typical documents include marriage contracts, adoption agreements, often for inheritance purposes, land sales and leases, wills and inheritance disputes, debt contracts, household and labor records. Because they document routine life, they provide an unusually clear snapshot of social customs and law in the ancient Near East in the second millennium BCE. Why are they important? The Nuzi tablets are crucial for understanding ancient Near Eastern social customs. They show how families handled heirs when no biological son existed, rights of wives and concubines, transfer of property across generations, legal fictions, adoption of an adult to secure inheritance. These practices were culturally normal, not exceptional. Legal norms outside royal law codes. Unlike Hammurabi-style law codes, idealized rules, Nuzi shows how law actually worked in practice. Connection to the Bible. Why they're often discussed together. Scholars noticed that several customs in Genesis closely resemble Nuzi-era practices. For example, adopting a household servant as heir, comparable to Abraham's concern in Genesis 15 about Eliezer. Using a surrogate to bear children, similar to Sarah and Hagar in Genesis 16. Inheritance rights tied to household status, not just biology. Important nuance. The Nuzi tablets do not mention biblical figures and do not prove the Bible directly. Instead, they demonstrate that the social world assumed by Genesis fits naturally within a known second millennium BCE legal culture. This strengthens arguments that Genesis reflects authentic ancient Near Eastern contexts rather than being invented in a much later period unfamiliar with those customs. So, the Nuzi tablets are independent secular documents, which is precisely why scholars value them. Why they matter for historical reasoning. For historians, the Nuzi tablets function as contextual control data. They help test whether biblical narratives align with known historical norms. They allow comparative legal analysis across cultures. They reduce anachronism claims when biblical customs match Nuzi era practice. The Nuzi Tablets are a real-world archive of everyday legal life in the ancient Near East. They don't tell biblical stories, but they show that many biblical customs belong exactly where the text claims they do, the Bronze Age Near Eastern world. So what can the Nuzi Tablets tell us about Genesis? Um, They strongly illuminate the social, legal, and familial world that Genesis assumes. They function as independent cultural control data for evaluating whether Genesis reflects an authentic second millennium BCE setting or a later anachronistic invention. Genesis fits a known Bronze Age legal world. The tablets come from Nuzi, 15th to 14th century BCE, and record routine household law. Many practices assumed in Genesis match these norms closely. Adoption as an inheritance strategy. At Nuzi, a household servant could be adopted as heir if no son existed. This mirrors Abraham's concern that a household servant would inherit, Genesis 15. When a biological son is later born, adoption contracts often revert inheritance, also consistent with Genesis. So the implication is that the concern is culturally normal, not invented theology. Surrogacy and secondary wives were legal regulated practices. Nuzi contracts show a wife could provide a female servant as a surrogate. The child legally belonged to the wife. The surrogate had lower status and limited rights. This aligns closely with Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Ishmael, Genesis 16 through 21. The implication? The narrative reflects real family law tensions of the period, not moral idealization. Birthright and household status mattered more than biology. Nuzi documents show inheritance depended on household rank and legal status, not just birth order. Birthrights could be contractually transferred. This helps contextualize Esau selling his birthright, Jacob's legal, not merely emotional claim. Implication? These stories presuppose legal categories that existed. Women's rights in Genesis match Nuzi-era realities. At Nuzi, wives could own property. Marriage contracts protected inheritance rights. Dowries were legally enforced. This aligns with Rebekah's agency, Leah and Rachel's property claims, Tamar's legal appeal in Genesis 38. The implication, Genesis portrays women as legal actors in ways consistent with the era. Names, social roles, and customs are regionally accurate. It shows comparable name types, similar clan-based kinship structures, matching household economies. Implication, Genesis reflects a plausible social ecology, not a foreign or Hellenistic one. So from a historical method standpoint, if Genesis were composed much later by authors unfamiliar with Bronze Age law, we would expect anachronisms. Instead, Genesis consistently reflects customs that faded centuries earlier. This raises the probability that Genesis preserves genuine early traditions even if edited later or compiled later. Bottom line, the Nuzi Tablets show that Genesis sounds right for its claimed world. They undermine the claims that Genesis is a late, culturally ignorant fabrication. The legal logic, family structures, and inheritance assumptions belong squarely in the second millennium BCE Near East. So what can the Nuzi Tablets tell us further into the Torah than Genesis? The Nuzi Tablets are most famous for illuminating Genesis, but their value does not stop there. They help us understand the pre-Sinai legal, social, and moral world than the rest of the Torah presupposes and then deliberately transforms. In short, Nuzi helps us to see what the Torah is changing, not just what it inherits. The Torah assumes a pre-existing legal culture. The Nuzi Tablets show that before Sinai, law was household-based, justice was patriarchal and contractual, status mattered more than moral equality, power was tied to kinship and property. When you move beyond Genesis, the Torah does not deny this world. It reforms it. Exodus, why liberation law is revolutionary. Nuzi law normalizes permanent debt servitude, hereditary household dependency, legal inequality between classes. Against that backdrop, Exodus introduces something radical. Slaves are liberated, not absorbed. Identity is national, not household. Law is grounded in divine justice, not private contracts. Nuzi helps us see how shocking Exodus law would have sounded to a Bronze Age audience. Torah law corrects Nuzi-style abuses. Many Torah laws make best sense when read against Nuzi-like practices. Adoption and inheritance. In Nuzi, adoption was used to manipulate inheritance. Elderly men adopt servants for security. In the Torah, inheritance was fixed by tribal identity. No private legal fictions override covenant order. This explains why the Torah is obsessed with genealogies beyond Genesis. Women and household power. In Nuzi, women protected only if the contractually valuable concubines were legally vulnerable. In the Torah, explicit protections for wives, concubines, and widows, limits on sexual exploitation, legal standing tied to covenant membership, not utility. This trajectory continues through Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Why Deuteronomy emphasizes justice so heavily? Nuzi shows law favors the powerful. The poor survive by patronage. Deuteronomy responds with repeated commands to protect the poor, widow, orphan, foreigner, limits on kings, elites, and creditors, public, not private justice. Seen this way, Deuteronomy is not redundant, it is corrective. Why Sinai law is framed as divine revelation. Nuzi law authority comes from social power. Contracts bind people not conscious. Torah law authority comes from God. Law binds everyone equally, including leaders. Without understanding Nuzi-style law, the theological framing of Sinai feels abstract. With Nuzi, it becomes historically intelligible. So, the big picture synthesis. Nuzi tells us what the Torah is reacting to. Genesis fits naturally within the Nuzi world. Exodus breaks that world open. Leviticus reorders it ethically. Deuteronomy reforms it socially. So beyond Genesis, Nuzi functions as a contrastive baseline. This is how law worked before covenantal justice. So the bottom line, the Nuzi Tablets show that the Torah is not late legal fiction and not generic A&E law. It is a deliberate moral re-engineering of an existing Bronze Age system, one the Nuzi Tablets allow us to see with unusual clarity. What details are in the Nuzi Tablets that are also in the Torah? So here is a detail level comparison of specific practices attested in the Nuzi Tablets that also appear in the Torah. These are not vague thematic similarities, but concrete legal and social mechanisms that line up closely, especially with Genesis, and then by contrast with later Torah law. We've already said adoption of a household servant as heir. Nuzi Tablets, childless couples formally adopt a servant as legal heir. The servant inherits property unless a biological son is later born. Contracts explicitly state the inheritant reverts if a son is born. In the Torah, Abraham fears his heir will be a household servant, in Genesis 15. Once Isaac is born, inheritance reverts to the biological son. No moral explanation is needed in the text because the practice is assumed. Key point, this is a legal mechanism, not symbolism. Surrogacy through a wife's maidservant, Nuzi Tablets. A wife may give her servant to her husband to bear children. The child is legally considered the wife's, not the servant's. The surrogate remains socially inferior and can be dismissed later. Torah. Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham, Genesis 16. Ishmael is Abraham's son, but not the covenant heir. Hagar's later expulsion fits known legal tensions in such arrangements. Key point, the arrangement is juridical, not merely cultural. Household authority over inheritance. Nuzi Tablets, inheritance follows household rank, not simply birth order. Legal status can override primogeniture. Birthrights can be contractually transferred. In the Torah, Jacob acquires Esau's birthright in Genesis 25. Jacob's sons receive unequal inheritance, Genesis 48 and 49. Status and blessing function as legal determinants. Key point, birthright is a transferable legal asset, not just tradition. Women's property and dowry rights. Nuzi Tablets. Women hold dowries as protected property. Dowries can be reclaimed if mistreated. Marriage contracts specify inheritance rights for children. Torah, Rebekah's dowry and agency, Genesis 24. Leah and Rachel argue over household property, Genesis 31. Daughters of Zelophehad assert inheritance rights, Numbers 27. Key point, women appear as recognized legal actors, not anomalies. Teraphim, household gods and inheritance claims. In the Nuzi Tablets, possession of household gods or teraphim can imply inheritance authority. They function as legal symbolic household markers. In the Torah, Rachel steals Laban's teraphim, Genesis 31. The act makes sense only if teraphim are tied to household claims. Key point, this detail is unintelligible without Nuzi-style context. Binding oral oaths and blessings. Nuzi tablets, spoken declarations, and oaths are legally binding. Reversal is difficult or impossible once witnessed. In the Torah, Isaac cannot revoke Jacob's blessing in Genesis 27. Spoken words carry irrevocable legal force. Key point, this reflects oral contract law, not superstition. Clan-based justice before centralized law. In the Nuzi tablets, justice is administered at the household clan level. No centralized state enforcement for daily disputes. In the Torah, patriarchs act as judges within their clans. Centralized law appears only later at Sinai. The key point, the Torah's legal development tracks historical reality. What this pattern tells us? These shared details show that the Torah assumes real second millennium BCE legal practices. The authors understood technical legal norms, not just stories. The text avoids anachronisms common to later periods. This is especially striking because the Nuzi tablets are independent, secular documents from Nuzi, while the Torah is a theological corpus. So the bottom line, the overlap between the Nuzi tablets and the Torah is structural, legal, and technical, not literary. They show that the Torah's earliest layers operate inside a real, attested Bronze Age legal world, and that later Torah law reforms and transcends that world rather than inventing it wholesale. So now we're going to do a Bayesian statistical model regarding the Nuzi tablets comparing to the Torah. So this is how we will quantify how much the Nuzi tablets, independent Bronze Age legal texts, shift the probability that the Torah, especially Genesis' patriarchal social legal world, reflects authentic second millennium A&E practice versus being a much later anachronistic construction. So here we will define hypotheses and evidence. So the hypotheses? Hypothesis number 1, context authentic. The Torah's patriarchal narratives and laws preserve or accurately reflect real second millennium Near Eastern social legal customs, even if edited later. Hypothesis 0, context anachronistic. The Torah's patriarchal narratives, laws, are primarily later inventions, and any match to second millennium practices, coincidence, or generic. Evidence E, a set of Nuzi Torah parallels. Let the evidence be a bundle of K observed detailed parallels, not just themes, e.g., adoption as heir mechanism, surrogate via maidservant, household inheritance status logic, dowry property protections, household gods teraphim as inheritance marker, often argued, binding oral declarations, blessings as quasi-legal. You can choose your own list. The model works either way. Represent them as indicators. E equals E1, E2, E3, E4, EK, and on, where E of I equals 1 means this specific parallel is present and well attested. So the core Bayesian update. Posterior odds form cleanest for evidence strength. So P of H1 given E, P of H1 given E over P of H0 given E, P of H1 over P of H0, your prior odds, P of E given H1 over P of E given H0, the Bayes factor. So now we will turn many parallels into a computable likelihood. A common move is the naive Bayes assumption, not perfect, but useful as a first model. The parallels are conditionally independent given each hypothesis. So the product over I equals 1 to K. So the Bayes factor becomes B equals the product from I equals 1 to k of p of e I given h1 over p of e I given h0. Plug in interpretable parameters. Let a of I equal p times e of I equal 1 given h of 1. This is the probability this specific Nuzi-like detail would appear if the Torah is context authentic. And then b of I equals p times e of I equals 1 given h of 0 is the probability that it appears even if the Torah is context anachronistic. So then you have, posterior and prior odds. So the concrete example, numbers that we can change, say you choose k equals 6 strong parallels, pick conservative-ish illustrative values. For strong technical parallels, a of I equals 0.6, reasonably likely under h of I, or h1, h of 1. Under h of 0, b of I equals 0.15, not impossible, but less likely. Then each parallel gives a mini-Bayes factor, a of I over b of I equals 0.6 over 0.15 equals 4. Across 6 parallels, b equals 4 to the 6th power, which is 4096. If your prior is skeptical, say p times h of 1 equals 0.2, p times h of 0 equals 0.8. Prior odds, 0.2 divided by 0.8 equals, or 0.8 divided by 0.2 equals 0.25. Posterior odds, 0.25 times 4096 equals 1024. Convert odds to probability. P times h of 1 given e equals 1024 over 1024 plus 1 is more or less equal to 0.999. Important honesty that 99.9% is not the truth. It's what you get if you accept A, independence, and B, those A, B values, and C, your parallels are strong and technical. In real scholarship, you'd usually dial down the strength because parallels are correlated, not independent. Some are debated, e.g. teraphim inheritance marker is argued, not universally agreed, and generic A&E similarity can make B of I higher. A more cautious approach is to reduce K to only the most secure parallels, raise B of I, or apply a correlation penalty below. So, to add a correlation penalty, quick realism upgrade. If the parallels aren't independent, you can approximate effective evidence count. So, I'm comparing two hypotheses. H1 says the Torah's patriarchal world reflects real second-millennium Near Eastern custom. H0 says it's mostly later invention and any matches are coincidence. I collect a set of Nuzi parallels, E. I then update using Bayes. Posterior odds equals prior odds times the Bayes factor. The Bayes factor is P of E given H1 over P of E given H0. If I treat each parallel as a clue, I multiply their individual strength ratios alpha over beta. If alpha is consistently much bigger than beta, the probability of H1 rises sharply. How many details in the Nuzi Tablets align with the Torah? Between 15 and 25 distinct non-trivial details in the Nuzi Tablets align with practices, assumptions, or mechanisms found in the Torah, with 8 to 10 of those being strong technical alignments, 5 to 8 moderate, and the rest weaker or contextual. This range reflects how historians responsibly count evidence, avoiding double counting and anachronism. How scholars count details, which is important. A detail here means a specific legal or social mechanism, not a vague theme. Independent attestation at Nuzi. A clear functional parallel in the Torah, mostly Genesis, some numbers Deuteronomy by contrast. We do not count general patriarchy, generic ancient law, shared Semitic culture, theology, or ritual. So category A, strong alignments, 8 to 10. These are technical, explanatory, and hard to fake later. Like we said before, adoption of a household servant as legal heir, reversion of inheritance when a biological son is born, wife-initiated surrogacy using a maidservant, legal distinction between surrogate's child and covenant heir status, transferability of birthright, inheritance status, household rank overriding simple primogeniture, binding legal force of spoken declarations, blessings, women holding protected dowry property rights, household gods, teraphim connected to inheritance, authority, debated but strong, clan-based adjudication prior to centralized courts. Why these matter? These explain why otherwise odd Torah passages without special pleading. Category B, moderate alignments, 5 to 8, clear parallels, but either more general or widespread in the A&E. Marriage contracts specifying children's inheritance, legal vulnerability of concubines versus wives, dismissal expulsion clauses in household arrangements, oath-based enforcement rather than written statute, property disputes resolved at household level, expectation of filial obligation tied to inheritance, economic logic behind Levier-like preservation of household lines. Category C, weak and contextual alignments, 5 to 7. These support plausibility but would not stand alone. Naming conventions consistent with Hurrian Akkadian milieu. Pastoral agrarian household economy assumptions. Multi-generational household structure. Bride, price, and dowry dual system. Legal concern for lineage continuity. Patronage-based protection of dependents. Absence of centralized state enforcement in daily life. What this totals. Strong, 8 to 10. Moderate, 5 to 8. Weak to contextual, 5 to 7. Total plausible alignments, 15 to 25, depending on how conservative you are. A very conservative count, strong plus most solid, moderate only, 12 to 15. A maximal scholarly count, including contextual, 20 to 25. Why this number is historically significant? Because the Nuzi Tablets come from Nuzi and are independent, secular legal records. This many specific matches what the Torah means. The Torah's patriarchal material is deeply embedded in a real Bronze Age legal world. The matches are structural, not literary borrowing. The probability of accidental convergence drops sharply with each additional detail. This is exactly why Nuzi is so powerful in Bayesian historical reasoning. You don't need one perfect match. You get many independent partial ones. Bottom line, in plain language, if Genesis were written much later by someone unfamiliar with Bronze Age household law, we'd expect anachronisms, simplified inheritance rules, moralized explanations where legal logic is missing. Instead, we find dozens of small, legally precise assumptions that line up with Nuzi. It strongly supports that it knows the world it claims to describe. So now we're going to create a Bayesian statistical model for this. Using the 15 to 25 alignments, while accounting for strong versus moderate versus weak details, and not all details are independent. So, odds update with a base factor, posterior odds. P of H1 given E over P of H0 given E equals P of H1 over P of H0 times P of E given H1 over P of E given H0. In layman terms, start with your prior leaning, H1 versus H0, multiply by how much more likely the Nuzi Torah alignment evidence is under H1 than under H0. That gives your updated leaning. Where H1, the Torah, especially Genesis world, reflects real Bronze Age legal social context. H0, where Torah's fit is mostly coincidence, generic A&E similarity, later invention, and where the evidence is the observed set of alignments. So the base factor, B equals P of E given H1 over P of E given H0. In layman terms, B is your evidence multiplier. If B equals 10, the Nuzi alignments are 10 times more expected if H1 is true than if H0 is true. Many details with different strength tiers, strong versus moderate versus weak. The clean way is to treat each alignment as a feature and multiply evidence by tier. So let K of S is the number of strong alignments, say 8 to 10. K of M, number of moderate alignments, say 5 to 8. K of W, number of weak contextual alignments, 5 to 7. So then you define per tier likelihood ratios. R of S equals P times a strong alignment given H of 1 over P times a strong alignment given H of 0. Then you have R of M equals P times a moderate alignment given H of 1 over P times a moderate alignment given H of 0. And then you have R of W equals P times a weak alignment given H of 1 over P times a weak alignment given H of 0. So here we have the tiered Bayes factor, naive independence. B equals R sub S to the K sub S times R sub M to the K sub M times R sub W to the K sub W. In layman's terms, each strong match gives you a big push towards H1. Each moderate gives a medium push. Each weak gives a small push. You multiply those pushes together. Example numbers, illustrative. A cautious set might be R of S equals 3, strong details that are 3 times more likely under H of 1. R of M equals 1.5, R of W equals 1.1. And choose a mid count like K of S equals 9, K of M equals 6, K of W equals 6, total of 21 alignments. Then B equals 3 to the 9th power times 1.5 to the 6th power times 1.1 to the 6th power. That's the structure. Then we can use a correlation penalty so we don't overclaim. The biggest trap is counting 20 details as 20 independent hits. Many come from the same underlying thing, household inheritance culture, so they're correlated. A simple fix is effective counts. Effective evidence counts. K star sub S equals C sub S times K sub S. And then you have tiered Bayes factor with correlation penalty. B equals R sub S to the K star sub S times R sub M to the K star sub M times R sub W to the K star sub W. And so in layman's terms, if minute details are basically the same kind of match, you discount them so you don't pretend you get 20 totally independent clues. This makes your conclusion strong but credible. A reasonable on-the-fly choice might be C of S equals 0.7, C of M equals 0.5, and C of W equals 0.3. So, for example, 9 strong becomes 9 times 0.7 equals 6.3 strong equivalent hits. Convert odds back to a probability people understand. So the odds is probability. If your posterior odds are 0 equals P times H of 1 given E over P times H of 0 given E, then P of H1 given E equals 0 over 1 plus 0. In layman's terms, odds are great for multiplying evidence. This converts the final odds back into a normal percent likelihood form. A complete plugin template that can be reused. If you choose your prior odds are your prior odds equal P times H of 1 over P times H of 0. That's, in layman's terms, that's my starting lean. You choose the tier counts, K of S, K of M, K of W, from your conservative to max range. Choose your tier ratios, R of S, R of M, R of W, your judgments about how diagnostic each tier is. Optionally apply correlation penalties, C of S, C of M, and C of W, and then compute. 0 of post equals 0 of prior. Odds times R sub S to the C sub S times K sub S times R sub M to the C sub M times K sub M times R sub W to the C sub W times K sub W. So in layman's terms, start where I am, then multiply by the evidence strength from strong, moderate, and weak matches, discounting for overlap. Convert to probability. P times H of 1 given E equals 0 of post over 1 plus 0 of post. Quick layman's summary. I'm comparing two explanations from either Genesis, Torah preserves real Bronze Age legal context, or it doesn't and the matches are a coincidence. The Nuzi Tablets give me a list of specific legal social details that line up. In Bayesian terms, I start with a prior belief, then multiply by how much more likely these details are if the Torah is context authentic than if it's not. I also discount the count because some details overlap. The result isn't proof, it's a transparent way to quantify how strongly Nuzi shifts the probability. So, Here are three instantiated Bayesian scenarios, conservative, moderate, and maximal, using the 15 to 25 alignments idea with a correlation discount, so we don't pretend every detail is independent. So here's the model. Equation A, posterior odds. P of H1 given E over P of H0 given E equals P of H1 over P of H0 times P of E given H1 over P of E given H0. In layman's terms, that means start with your leaning, multiply by how much better the Nuzi alignments fit if the Torah is context authentic versus if it's coincidence. Equation B, Bayes factor. B equals P of E given H1 over P of E given H0. In layman's terms, B is the evidence multiplier. Equation C, tiered evidence, strong, moderate, weak, with correlation discount. Let K of S, K of M, K of W equal counts of strong, moderate, weak alignments from your 15 to 25 range. Let R of S, R of M, and R of W, how diagnostic each tier is, likelihood ratios. Let C of S, C of M, C of W correlate to 0 and 1. The correlation discounts the effective independence. So read aloud, B equals R sub S to the C sub S times K sub S times R sub M to the C sub M times K sub M times R sub W to the C sub W times K sub W. In layman's terms, strong matches count more than weak ones, and we discount the total because many details overlap. Equation D, convert odds to probability. If 0 of post equals P of H1 given E over P of H0 given E, then P of H1 given E equals 0 over 1 plus 0. Actually, to correct that, P of H1 given E equals 0 of post over 1 plus 0 of post. So in layman's terms, this turns the final odds into a normal probability. So choose your priors, starting beliefs. I'll show sensitivity at 3 priors, 10% skeptical, 20% very cautious but open, 50% agnostic. Scenario instantiations, numbers plus results. Scenario 1, conservative, minimal claims. The idea, only the most defensible alignments, heavily discounting small per detail strength parameters. Counts, KS equals 8, K of M equals 5, K of W equals 0. Strength, so R of S equals 1.6, R of M equals 1.15. Discounts, C of S equals 0.5, C of M equals 0.3. This yields B is more or less equal to 8.08. What that does to the prior, the skeptical posterior arrives at 47.3%. The very cautious but open-minded arrives at 66.9%. That's above 50. And then the prior 50% agnostic arrives at 88.99%, almost 90%. So in layman's terms, even if you're pretty cautious, the Nuzi alignment bundle can single-handedly move you from unlikely to coin flip, or from maybe to 2/3 likely, without even overclaiming. Scenario 2, moderate your 15 to 25 range used still discounted parameters. With counts, K of S equals 9, K of M equals 6, K of W equals 6. For the strengths, R of S equals 2.2, R of M equals 1.3, R of W equals 1.05. Discounts, C of S equals 0.6, C of M equals 0.4, C of W equals 0.2. This yields B is more or less equal to 140.6. So then with posterior results, completely skeptical prior 10% would be a posterior of 93.98%. Skeptical but open-minded, posterior of 97.23%. And then agnostic prior would have a posterior of 99.29%. In layman's terms, if you accept that a decent number of these details are genuinely diagnostic but still overlapping, the evidence becomes a strong multiplier. Scenario 3, maximal upper end counts plus stronger diagnostic weight. The parameters, the counts go K of S equals 10, K of M is 8, K of W is 7. Strengths, R of S is 3, R of M is 1.5, R of W is 1.1. Discounts, C of S is 0.7, C of M is 0.5, C of W is 0.3. This yields B is about equal to 13,525. So posterior results for the prior 10% is now a posterior of 99.93%. For a prior 20%, posterior is now 99.97%. For a prior 50%, posterior is now 99.99%. Layman's terms, if you treat many of the alignments as strongly diagnostic and you still discount overlap, the posterior saturates near certainty. The honest takeaway, the direction is robust. Nuzi-like alignments push strongly toward the Torah's patriarchal world fits real Bronze Age household law. The exact percentage depends on which parallels you count as truly strong, how much you think H of 0 can explain via generic A and A similarity, and how hard you discount correlation. How many names in the Nuzi Tablets match names in the patriarchal genealogies or the Torah at large? Short answer, careful and defensible. Between 15 and 30 personal names in the Nuzi Tablets have plausible matches or close analogs in the Torah, with 5 to 8 being relatively strong matches, 5 to 10 being moderate, and the rest weak or generic. So the value here is onomastic pattern alignment, and so it means that we have the same or closely related Semitic Hurrian name roots attested in the same cultural linguistic world, used in similar social roles, servants, heirs, wives, officials. And just keep in mind, the Nuzi tablets come from Nuzi, 15th to 14th century BCE, while the Torah spans multiple periods and genres. So scholars divide matches by strength. Category A, stronger name parallels, 5 to 8. These involve close phonetic root matches to patriarchal era names or names in Genesis numbers that are not extremely common. Terah, Tura, Tirhu, phonetic variants attested in Nuzi type corpora. Laban, Labanu, Nahor, Nahara, Nahu, Zillah, Zili, Milka, Milku, Milkatu, Abdi, names of servants, servant of constructions, Abdi El, common in the Torah, Ilu El, theophoric elements in personal names. Why these matter? They match names, roots, and constructions, not just vague sounds, and they appear in appropriate household roles. Category B, moderate parallels, 5 to 10. These are recognizable biblical name types, but also more widely used across the A&E. So the examples are Yashub, Yashib, Yasubu, Shalim, Shulmu, Dan, Danu, Hanan, Hananu, Ahi, brother of, name constructions, Ya, Yahu, Ilu, suffixes, language dependent. Why they're moderate? They fit the Torah's onomastic world well, but are not unique to Nuzi or Israel. Category C, weak, generic overlaps 5 to 12. These include very common Semitic names, titles or occupational names later used as personal names, names whose roots are Pan-Levantine or Pan-Mesopotamian. Examples, Abu, Abi, Shama, Shema, Amu, Ami, Bel, Baal, elements present in Nuzi but rejected in Torah theology. Why they're weak? They support plausibility, not specificity. What this totals, realistic scholarly range, strong, 5 to 8, moderate, 5 to 10, weak, generic, 5 to 12, total plausible overlaps, 15 to 30. So a very conservative list, strong plus best moderate only, 10 to 15, a maximal but still responsible list, 25 to 30. What this tells us, the Torah's patriarchal names fit naturally within a second millennium BCE naming environment. Genesis does not use later Persian, Greek, or Hellenistic name patterns. The name system matches a household-based kinship society like that seen at Nuzi. So why do names matter in Bayesian reasoning? Onomastics functions as low weight but cumulative evidence. One name means nothing. 10 plausible matches in the right period matter. When combined with legal, social, and inheritance parallels, the probability shift compounds. That's why in a Bayesian model, name matches usually get weak to moderate likelihood ratios, but they still push in the same direction as the legal data. The bottom line in plain language, the Nuzi tablets don't give us Abraham's family tree, but they do show that the names Genesis uses belong to the right world. When a text uses the right legal logic, assumes the right household structures, and employs the right name ecology, it becomes much harder to argue that it's a late, culturally ignorant fabrication. To be comprehensive, so the stronger, more specific parallels, 7 to 9, Laban, Lebanu, Nahor, Nahara, Terah, Tirhu, Zillah, Milcah, Abdi, Iluel. Moderate parallels, 8 to 10, Dan, Hanan, Ahi, Amu, Yashub, Shalem, Shema, Uri, Uru. Weak generics, Abi, Abu, Ish, Bela, Bilu, Arapu, Zakar, Zakru, Shapat, Shapatu, Natan, Natnu, Bel, and Baal. So, Nuzi is a Hurrian Akkadian household archive. Genesis reflects a Semitic patriarchal household world. You should expect partial name overlap, shared name logic, different distributions, and the fact that the right kinds of names appear in the right social roles in the right time horizon supports the claim that Genesis is operating inside a real second millennium naming ecology, not a later Persian or Hellenistic one. So the bottom line, Nuzi shows that Genesis uses names that belong exactly where the story says it takes place. That kind of fit, when combined with legal, social, and inheritance parallels, is why Nuzi is supporting evidence. So now we're going to create a Bayesian statistical model for the names. Hypothesis and data to plug in. Hypothesis 1 is context authentic. Torah's patriarchal material comes from or faithfully preserves a second millennium BC. H of 0 is context anachronistic. You know the deal. Let observed, so the observed evidence, let n equal the number of distinct Nuzi personal names considered after normalization. Let m equal the number of distinct Torah names considered patriarchal genealogies or Torah-wide. Let m equal the number of matches you claim, but we'll make this weighted. So because match is in binary, we use weights, where each match I gets a weight. 1 is a strong match, same root, very close form, not super common. 0.5 is a moderate match. 0.2 is weak generic match. So model 1, binomial likelihood on weighted matches. P of m sub w given h sub j equals ineffective, choose m sub w, times p sub j to the m sub w times 1 minus p sub j to the ineffective minus m sub w. In layman's terms, assume that there are ineffective opportunities for overlap. If the true overlap rate is p, what's the chance we'd see m of w matches, where p of 1 is expected overlap rate if h1 is true, higher, p of 0 expected overlap rate if h0 is true, lower, effective number of chances after discounting correlated common names, explained next. Effective sample size, correlation plus common name penalty, a simple defensible penalty. Ineffective equals gamma times n. In layman's terms, if names are correlated, same root families, same theophoric patterns, we shouldn't count every name as a fully independent chance to match. Gamma shrinks the data set to a fairer effective size. Typical illustrative values, very conservative gamma equals 0.2 to 0.4, moderate gamma equals 0.4 to 0.6. So the Bayes factor from the binomial model, B equals P of M sub W given H1 over P of M sub W given H0. In layman's terms, how much more expected is the observed name overlap if H1 is true than if H0 is true? Posterior odds, P of H1 given M sub W over P of H0 given M sub W equals P of H1 over P of H0 times B. In layman's terms, your updated leaning equals your starting leaning times the evidence multiplier. So convert odds to probability. P of H1 given M sub W equals 0 over 1 plus 0. In layman's terms, turn odds into a normal probability. So a cleaner presentation model per match likelihood ratios, weighted product of likelihood ratios, defined per tier likelihood ratios, R of S for strong name matches, R of M for moderate, R of W for weak generic. Let K of S, K of M, K of W be the counts in each tier. B equals R sub S to the K sub S times R sub M to the K sub M times R sub W to the K sub W. In layman's terms, each strong name match pushes the odds by R of S. Do that K of S times. Same for moderate and weak. Good conservative name-only ratio changes. Name overlap is usually not super diagnostic, so keep these modest. R of S equals 1.2 to 1.8. R of M is 1.05 to 1.3. R of W is 1 to 1.1. So if we set these too high, the model will overclaim, and that's not what we're trying to do here. So add a correlation discount, optional but recommended. B equals R sub S to the C sub S times K sub S times R sub M to the C sub M times K sub M times R sub W to the C sub W times K sub W. In layman's terms, if many name matches come from the same naming pattern, like lots of L endings, we discount their effective count. Typical discounts, C of S equals 0.5 to 0.8, C of M is 0.3 to 0.6, C of W is 0.1 to 0.4. 3 instantiated scenarios, name overlap only. Scenario A, conservative names are weak evidence. Assume K of S equals 5, K of M equals 6, K of W equals 10, R of S equals 1.3, R of M is 1.1, R of W is 1.03, C of S is 0.6, C of M is 0.4, C of W is 0.2. Then B equals 1.3 to the third power times 1.1 to the 2.4th power times 1.03 to the second power equals 2.3. So B is about 2.3. Layman terms, names alone nudge you towards H1, but they don't settle it. So if your prior is only 20%, prior odds 0.2, 0.8, 0.25, posterior odds 0.25 times 2.3 is 0.575. Posterior P of H1 is 0.575 to 1.575. It's about 36.5%. Scenario B, if you're moderate, you believe your strong matches are real, assume K of S equals 7, K of M is 8, K of W 10, R of S 1.5, R of M 1.15, R of W 1.05, C of S 0.7, C of M 0.5, C of W 0.25. So now we have B is about 1.5 to the 4.9th power, 1.15 to the 4th power, times 1.05 to the 2.5 power. Equals about 10.6. So prior 20%, posterior odds 0.25 times 10.6 is 2.65. Probability of 2.65 or 3.65 is about 72.6%. So in layman's terms, if you treat several matches as genuinely diagnostic, names can become a strong supporting line, but still supporting, not primary. Excuse me. Scenario C, aggressive. This is not names alone prove it, but it is definitely supportive. So now assume K of S is 8, K of M is 10, K of W is 12, R of S is 1.8, R of M is 1.25, R of W is 1.08, C of S is 0.8, C of M is 0.6, C of W is 0.3. So now we have B is equal to 1.8 to the 6.4 power times 1.25 to the 6th power times 1.08 to the 3.6 power equals 115. Prior 20% odds 0.25 times 115 equals 28.75. Probability 28.75 to 29.75 is a 96.6%. Probability. In layman's terms, this says names alone almost decide the equation, which most careful historians would say is too strong unless your match list is extremely rigorous and your H of 0 overlap rate is demonstrably low. So I'm treating name overlap as supporting evidence, not proof. I weight strong matches more than generic ones, and I discount overlap because name patterns cluster. Under conservative assumptions, the Nuzi name overlap modestly increases the probability that Genesis reflects a second millennium naming world. Under more optimistic assumptions, it increases it a lot. But the strongest case comes when names are combined with legal and social mechanism matches, which are more diagnostic than names alone. So where does all this actually leave us? It leaves us with something very important in historical reasoning: convergence. When we step back and look at the Nuzi Tablets, independent secular household records from the second millennium BCE, we find that the names, the legal logic, and the family structures assumed by the Torah fit comfortably inside a real attested Bronze Age world. Naturally, the name overlap on its own is modest, and that's exactly what we should expect. Names repeat across cultures, and any honest model has to discount common patterns. That's why we treated name data as supporting evidence. And when we did that carefully, conservatively, the numbers moved the probability in the right direction. But here's the key point. When those names align in the same period, inside the same household-based legal system, alongside the same inheritance mechanisms, adoption practices, and family hierarchies, the chance that all of this is accidental drops sharply. Bayesian reasoning doesn't ask whether something is absolutely proven. It asks whether a hypothesis becomes more or less probable as evidence accumulates. And in this case, every independent line, the law, the social world, the naming ecology, pushes in the same direction. What it tells us is this: the Torah does not read like a late text guessing at a forgotten world. It reads like a tradition that knows the world it's talking about and knows it in ways that are difficult to fake centuries later. At that point, the question shifts. Not is this coincidence, but how much coincidence is really plausible before explanation gives way to special pleading? That's the question Bayesian models are meant to sharpen. And it's the question we should be asking carefully, transparently, whenever ancient texts intersect with real history. And with that, thank you very much.